Let's bring in our chopper reporter and photographer, Dan Rice, veteran of our airways in this market. You've been in all kinds of situations, Dan, and so we pose to you the obvious question: why would someone be flying in this kind of weather, that close to Trump Tower, on a day like this? I know you don't know the answer, but where does your mind go on a situation that you're hearing so far?
Maurice, I mean, the obvious answer for me is I don't know, because as you mentioned, there is a flight restriction around Manhattan. It's something that we have to deal with every day. Our pilots, Lars and Drees and Ed Weyerreiter, there are areas we can't fly in the city, and the one is that when you talk about with the flight restriction around Trump Tower, it's 2 miles and 3,000 feet, which if you're trying to look at it on a map, think of it from the Empire State Building north to the Central Park Reservoir and between the Hudson and East Rivers. So on a clear day, you would know not to be in that area as long as the pilot has done the appropriate checks before he goes flying. Weather conditions like today, this is what they call IFR, Instrument Flight Rules, which basically means you have to use the instruments of the helicopter, which is a special kind of rating that's needed by a pilot in certain kind of helicopters to be able to fly in those conditions. Chopper 2, we're a VFR helicopter, Visual Flight Rules. We wouldn't be flying in something like this because you have to be able to see where everything is. So to get lost like that, we'll just say for now, it's hard to say why you end up that far into Manhattan. It's hard to tell what that person was going through at the time of the incident.
And who flies on a day like this, Dan? We know this was not a law enforcement chopper, right? It shouldn't have been a sightseeing chopper. Who would typically fly on a day like this to begin with, much less over Midtown Manhattan of all places?
Well, there are chartered helicopters. There are corporate helicopters. You see the big Sikorsky helicopters that come out of the west side of Manhattan. Like I said, there are helicopters and other aircraft that are instrument rated. So they can fly using the instruments on the helicopter, and there are certain routes. There's almost like a highway in the sky where they have their maps, and obviously with the technology today, it can be on an iPad, on an instrument in the helicopter, that they can fly according to the compass and certain bearings, and there's certain routes that you have to fly. Even when we're flying along on Visual Flight Rules, the towers will tell Ed or Lars, take the Linden route or the 280 route, and there are certain routes you're going to fly along. So in the instruments, it just means you've been specially trained, and the aircraft can handle it. The weather itself is not the issue because the helicopter can fly in the rain. It can fly with the low clouds, but you have to be able to avoid the obstacles, in this case, obviously, the tall buildings of Manhattan. So the corporate helicopters and certain chartered helicopters that are made to be able to fly in this, because think about it, the airliner you get on to go fly somewhere, those fly in all kinds of conditions as well. They're all off of the instruments. So you can fly in this weather. Obviously, if you don't have the right ratings, you don't have the right instruments, you don't fly in this weather. And that's what we have to find out from the NTSB, what kind of helicopter this was. Maybe it was somebody who just was ill-advised in flying. It's hard to tell at this point until the NTSB does their investigation.
Dan, I'm just sitting here as we're able to just sort of take a breath and look at some of these pictures a bit closer and listen to some of the witnesses. And the fact that this helicopter crash landed on the roof, a hard landing on top of that roof. No one else was hurt. It's really quite remarkable that, unfortunately, the pilot is dead, but no one else was even injured.
And that's what you look at, too, because, and Maurice will tell you, unfortunately, we were somewhere else in the city many years ago where we experienced an incident like this firsthand. And I can tell you that when the helicopter knew it had problems, that pilot tried to avoid as much as he could, and he was able to land the helicopter, and no one was killed in that incident back in 2004. It happens, and these guys, again, these pilots are usually trained very well, and the machine is very maneuverable. They are able to, if they, can manipulate the helicopter correctly, you can try to do the landings. I mean, for years, they used to land on rooftops in the city up until the Pan Am accident back, I think it was the early 80s, late 70s. So, it was thankful that this person at least was able to contain it to the small impact that it had, unfortunately, giving his life or her life in the incident.
Maybe in the end here, Dan, we'll be giving this chopper pilot all kinds of praise. We just don't know just yet, but that certainly is something to just be one fatality in a situation like this in such a populated area. 7th Avenue, right above the Sheraton Hotel, just below the Sheraton Hotel, actually, and just blocks away from the heart of Broadway.
And
you know how
damage
many
to
people are there on Times Square.
Yeah, and almost damage to the building as well.
Right.
You know, you have to, the fact that, you know, we heard that there was a small fire, but we haven't heard of any structural damage as of yet. And even the people that were near the top floors, you know, they just said that they felt it shake. But really, there was nothing physical that you could see wrong with the building.
Which is pretty incredible there. Dan Rice, we're going to talk to you some more in just a bit. If you could stand by, we really appreciate your insight.